Hi everybody, it's the 18th of September 2023 and this is Tales from the Hut and Hangar Volume 3. I'm just about to set off to Middlezoy to speak to Dave Linney, who I've known for a good few years with my connections with Middlezoy Aerodrome. Dave's an ex-squadron leader and display pilot, amongst many other things. So we should have a nice conversation about Dave's career. And while I'm here, thank you very much for returning to the podcast and welcome again to anybody new to them. Please like and subscribe and follow us because we've got a lot of interesting people coming up in the future. Thank you very much. Right, hello Dave.
Morning Keith.
Morning. I've got a template of questions here. It seems to be quite generic things, but let's start. Let's be very formal. Your date and place of birth, please.
8th of August 1947 at Farnborough in Kent, not the other one. So I was just down the hill from Biggin Hill. Whether that had anything to do with it.
Oh yeah, crikey, that probably
only
led you
lived
away.
there 9 months.
Well, I didn't know that. So I'll start with, what's your childhood memory and when did you get hooked on aviation? What inspired you? What did you see, or is it in your blood? Or?
It was actually all down to Uncle George and Auntie Gladys. Not real uncle and aunt.
We all had aunties like that.
Yeah.
And aunties, yeah.
My parents every Christmas had some old friends from Regent Street Polytechnic come and stay over the Christmas period, and there was Uncle George and Auntie Gladys and Uncle Harold and Auntie Doreen, and of course it's good for a little kid like me because there was extra 2 presents in the pillowcase
That's all right,
Christmas morning. Anyway, this particular Christmas, it must have been, I think, Christmas 1954, George and Gladys' present was a Keelcraft kit of a Hunter.
Oh, blimey.
For Jetex power with augmenter tube, I seem to remember. It had this jet pipe in it. And, of course, the Hunter was just coming into service in 1954, operational service.
How spooky that is.
And I thought, oh, this is fantastic. I'll have to see if Dad will help me build it. And little did I think at the time that I'd get nearly 3,000 hours on the real thing later in life. But yeah, that set me going on building model aircraft, and from then on there was no stopping. I just wanted to fly.
Any links with your mum and dad to aviation in that way?
None whatsoever, no. My mother looked like Amy Johnson, but that's about the only link.
So what was your first ever flight then?
It was in a Heron.
Oh, okay.
From off the grass at Croydon Airport, wow. Jersey Airlines, going to holiday in Jersey when I was about, I think I was probably 6 or 7.
That's good, isn't it? Because there's a Heron still there, isn't there, I think, at the front.
I think
they've got one on stilts.
Yes, yeah.
And that's, right, okay. Well, that's interesting.
I remember looking out of the window and seeing these 2 black spinners, and it looked just like, the front of a Lancaster.
Yeah, I suppose, you started dreaming then, didn't you?
Yeah, I did.
I suppose. Right, so moving on from that, what's your story of connection with aviation?
Well,
Where did it start?
Yeah, like I said, I started building model aeroplanes, still do, nearly 70 years later. And all through my childhood, I was building little models. And when I was 13, I got my first radio control outfit, which was a single channel press button thing.
Nice.
And managed to successfully fly a model up on Epsom Downs, which is was fairly close to home then. We lived in Purley and Coulston. And then I got a more advanced set, and I kept flying at Epsom Downs until I left school and joined the Air Force. Kept the modelling going throughout my career, but obviously it tailed off a bit when I started playing with the real thing.
I suppose all that time you just thought you want to get into flying, was it? Nothing else?
Absolutely, yeah. I just knew I had to fly. The dream would be to be a fighter pilot, but I thought, I'll never make that.
Oh, right.
But if you don't dream and you don't try...
So where did you join up then? Where did you start?
I joined in June 67. I had done test and advance when I was 16 for Cranwell, and I went through the whole palaver of all the exams and tests and getting the nuclear bomb across the river with 2 pine logs and that sort of thing. got to the final interview, and in front of three chaps, I think, wing commander and 2 squadron leaders or whatever it was, and they said, well done, Linney. We're pleased to tell you that you've passed selection, and subject to getting 2 A levels, we can say that we can offer you a course at Cranwell as an engineer.
Oh, engineer?
A sudden, I beg your pardon, sir. I said, well, you tick the hay fever box on the medical. They said, we can't let you fly if you get hay fever. And I said, well, I did the sort of bard a bit, almost thumped the table. I said, but I've got to fly, sir, I've got to fly.
Oh, right.
And they said, well, look, you can always come back and have another go at the selection. And as I sort of dragged myself back to the door to leave the office, he said, just as I was about to leave, they said, oh, and by the way, I have a flying scholarship. Oh, right, thank you.
Oh, right.
So I went away thinking, why did they do that?
Mm.
And clearly they wanted me to go back later and at a later date and lie about the hayfield, which is what I did eventually. So I went off and I did my flying scholarship at Biggin Hill on air coops and Chipmunk. And come the A-levels, that was where it all started to go wrong. I was doing physics and pure and applied maths as separate subjects. And I was all right with the physics, but I never did understand pure maths. I doubt I could even have passed it at O-level. And the result was I failed both the maths subjects. So that was, even if I'd gone back and got into Cranwell, I wouldn't have got there. But in the meantime, I'd gone and done the selection at Hamble,
right,
for the BA BOAC school. And same thing, similar selection procedure. And they said, yeah, get you 2 A levels and you'll be here. Well, when I'd only got 1, I rang them up and said, I've got a bit of a problem. And they said, yes, you're absolutely right, you have, you're not coming.
Oh, right.
Oh my God, I thought, what do I do now? So why did they give me a flying scholarship? I'll go and have another go. I'll see if I can get in on a direct entry commission. So back to Biggin Hill, through all the bloody tests again.
Yeah.
And at the end of that, they said, well, yes, you've passed, Linney. Last time you were here, you said you had hay fever. I said, well, that was a mistake. So I had a summer cold and I couldn't throw off. And
that's all gone away.
Yeah, it's all gone away. They said, yes, we thought so. So I got on a direct.
So you're quite
entry.
lucky to get in then, really, in the end.
Yes, I was. Yeah, by the skin of my teeth. 3816 direct entry commission.
So did you find you were naturally good at pilot, or did you have to work hard at it? And what was the first thing you flew then, really?
Oh Christ, you always work hard at it.
Yeah.
The thing that really helped was having been an aero modeller and flown radio controlled aeroplanes.
So you understood how things work.
Yeah,
I suppose.
and I spent a lot of time in the CCF at school in the RAF section. So, I understood principles of flight and that sort of thing. And that helped a hell of a lot. And so I pitched up in June 67 at RAF, as it was then, South Cerney, which was the aircrew officer training school. Did all the square bashing and learn how to eat and which knife and fork to use and so on. It's quite funny. There's the instructors did an example sort of sketch of how not to behave in a restaurant.
Really?
And one of them stood up and to give a toast and said, "Daggers up your bum." So I thought, no, that's a good one. I've used that ever since. Inappropriate.
Did you find that comfortable? Because I suppose you're just from a normal background. Did you find it like aloof, or did you sort of think, I've got to do this? Or
I don't think so. It wasn't too.
It could alienate
posh,
some
if you
people,
like.
couldn't it? Yeah.
It could have done. I mean, my best friend there, Ian Lord, he was a true Cockney, and he got through all right. So
right, if he can do it,
I stood a chance. Yeah.
So where'd you go on from then? Once you'd done your basic flying and stuff?
Had a little bit of holding, and then my basic flying was at South Cerney on the Jet Provost, and it was a bit of a leap because I'd learnt to fly on the air coupe, which, I mean, you could put a monkey in there, they could fly that successfully. And leapt straight onto a a jet.
Yeah, that's good.
And I can remember taxiing out for my first duel, and the taxiways at South Cerney have got lights down the centre line of it.
Right.
And so I thought, I'll just keep off those. And the instructor said, "Why aren't you taxiing on the centre line?" I said, "Well, it's all taxi it on the centre line." So I did. Bobong, bobong,
yeah.
bobong. But basic went okay, and I wasn't brilliant, I suppose, about middle of the course, I felt.
But you just had to work hard at it, I suppose.
I worked hard at it.
And what was your first solo like in a jet then? That must have been magical.
Yeah, I
just
can just
nerves
about
or-
remember it. It was at RAF Syerston. We flew over there. We flew a circuit. We taxied in. He jumped out and said, "Off you go then. Just go and do three touch and goes, or 3 landings," which I did. And to be honest, I can't remember that particularly well.
No, right.
Equally, I can't remember particularly well my first solo on the air coup.
Oh, right. Okay.
So, but I've got a terrible memory,
Yeah.
So.
So where did you get placed then? Where's your first placement? When was that? And what with?
I was lucky enough to be recommended for fast jet. So after holding at St Athan for a couple of months or so, in the meantime I got married.
Right.
Gosh, in those days, at 21. Went to Valley on the Gnat, which was a fantastic aeroplane. I really enjoyed that. And it was really challenging, and I was incredibly lucky to pass out top of the course, and got the flying trophy and all that cup of honour and all that guff.
Yeah.
And they said, right, you can have the posting of your choice.
Well, that's nice.
And the choice was
off your hands.
Lightning, Buccaneer, Harrier.
The new
Yeah,
Harrier.
they're just starting to take the first tourists.
Wow.
You'll be one of the first tourists. They're going to see if you can hack it. And I said, yeah, Harrier, please.
Cool. Wow.
So I got this Harrier posting, and of course this was 69, and it was just coming into service with one squadron. They were having lots of problems, and there were a couple of crashes. I think Duncan Simpson had to jump out of a 2-seater, and one of the one squadron guys had a problem. So the whole thing was delayed, and they said, look, you're going to have to hold. I said, well, how long? They said, well, it could be a year and a half.
All right.
And I said, oh dear. They said, where do you want to hold? I said, oh, Chivner, please.
All right. So you really had a choice then.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, you could say what you wanted.
Yeah.
Luckily enough, they gave you my
Oh,
choice.
that's great.
And of course,
Why Chivner in particular then?
well, that's where all the hunter training was done.
Ah, right. Okay. Yeah. Sorry.
So they said, all right, off you go to Chivner. And I pitched up there, and I did a couple of months in station headquarters. And then a tragedy, well, a tragedy for the guys that were killed. One of the holding students was adjutant to Chris Golds, the boss of 79 Squadron, and he'd gone off in a Chipmunk with Mac Mackenzie, the Chipmunk QFI. They had 4 Chipmunks on the squadron. And they were doing some spinning, and it didn't recover, and they jumped out too late, and they were both killed,
Oh, dear.
which was absolutely horrible. And that was the first time I had come into contact with the death,
Yeah, how serious it all was as well.
flying death. And yeah, it gets you a bit the first time, because I sort of knew Chris. And a few days later, I got a call from Chris Golds, the boss of 79, saying, I need an adjutant. Do you want to come over? I thought, oh, what the hell does an adjutant do?
Yeah, that's going to be my question.
It turns out you make lots of Chinograph boards
Oh, right, okay.
and put up pictures and things like that. But anyway, I went and became adjutant on 79 Squadron, and I couldn't have had a greater bit of luck. Chris Golds was a very experienced hunter pilot in AFC. The squadron was the one that did all the postgraduate courses, so
Right.
they did hunter PAI courses and fighter recce instructor courses and that sort of thing. And so there was a lot going on there with some very experienced staff. And Chris, who was an aero modeller like me.
All right, you had a lot in common then.
Yeah, we had a lot in common. He brewed all his homemade wine.
Even better.
Yeah, and I mean, weekends for me were flying on the airfield with Chris and then back to his house.
So it's a dream come true then.
It was a dream come true, yeah.
About it, yeah.
And get laid out with some of his red Infuriator.
Brilliant. Oh, that's good.
So that was good. And he let me fly the Chipmunks as much as I wanted to. So I got about 140 hours on the Chipmunks. I got a check out on the Hunter, so I did a bit of Hunter flying. And I even did 6.5 hours on the Meteor.
Oh, right.
Because they wanted someone to take over the flag towing with the Meteor F8.
Oh, okay.
But I was jumped on by the station commander and OC Ops who wanted to do it, so I got sidelined, which was a shame because I'd like to fly in the single-seater.
At least you had a go, I suppose.
I had a go, yeah. Anyway, the time came that I was the Harrier was being fixed, and the time came for me to do my pre-Harrier course on the Hunter there. So I moved a couple hundred yards down the road to 234 Squadron and did my pre-Harrier course, which luckily I passed, and that was when the fun really started, to be honest.
So how did they do a course at Harrier? Did you have to go on helicopters or something, or understand
Yes.
a different principle of flight, or?
Not really. Everyone who I think they still do it. Everyone did it. Who was going onto the Harrier had to do 6 hours on a helicopter, and they would go to in those days it was RAF Turnhill, and do 6 hours on a Whirlwind.
What's that? Generally, just get the transitional bit and understand that principle of flying.
I mean, it was brilliant. You didn't have to learn helicopter aerodynamics and all that sort of stuff.
Just have to do it, I suppose.
Yeah, your instructor went out and got in, started it up, and you got in and sat there. He said, "Right, off you go. He said, well, lift this up and wiggle this about." And so we did transitions to the hover and that sort of thing, which is probably the most difficult thing for a fixed-wing aeroplane chap to do. To see the ASI just coming down to zero and you still haven't crashed. So that was useful. We did vertical takeoffs and landings and roller landings and things, and it was a really brilliant feed-in to fly on the Harrier.
Great,
which was magic. So I did that, and then we were starting ground school on the Harrier.
Oh, okay. So I suppose you went into a squadron of Harriers then, I suppose, eventually.
Well, yeah, the OCU course was absolutely brilliant. There were two squadrons. There was the basic squadron and the advanced squadron. The basic taught you to fly the aeroplane. They had some fabulous instructors there. Squadron leader Richie Profit was the boss, and I flew a lot with a chap called Bill Brewer and an American.
So with the new type like the Harrier, with a lot of these people like test pilots, because no one's really flown that sort of aircraft before?
No, not really. Most of them were ex-hunter guys.
Oh, okay.
But all the early chaps, right up almost until our first tour chaps courses, they learnt without a two-seater.
Oh.
They were just told what to do,
Crikey.
given the aeroplane, and go off and do a vertical takeoff and a vertical landing. For your first 20 sorties, for a long time, even after I'd sort of finished the course, they would record your first 20 sorties on 16mm movie, and some of those were absolutely hilarious. There were a couple of tragic ones, where there was an American killed at Dunsfold and things like that. But some of them were absolutely hilarious. But it was a great aid to debriefing technique and things like that.
I suppose you all learn at the same time, aren't you, as well? With
You are, yes, that's
so
right.
There's a bit of leeway, I suppose, and you just get on with it.
I mean, the first solo in the Harrier, you did 2 duels. And your first solo was a conventional takeoff, some general handling, and then come back for a conventional landing. Well, conventional takeoff's all right. I mean, it's just like a Hunter, really. You do it with the nozzles aft and fly it off the ground. But the conventional landing was something else. Touchdown was about 160 knots, and you're then on this T-trolley,
Yeah.
with the four wheels, and you can't use the wheel brakes until you're under about 50 knots. So what you had to do was move the nozzles so that they moved into the braking stop position, which was forward, and then slowly put the power up. But you had to be very, very ginger, because if you overdid it, it would ride up on its nose wheel. And
I see.
a friend of mine nearly killed himself on his first solo.
Yeah, I never thought of that with the out-rigging undercarriage and stuff.
Yeah, it was wacky. They stopped doing that eventually, and they did slow landings with a bit of nozzle, so on.
Yeah, right, that's good. So, what was your first placement then?
Oh well,
squadron.
I went an awful long way. I went about 150 yards from the OCU down to one squadron, which had to be my first choice, because they were the first people to start flying the aeroplane, and they got so much history.
Cool, yeah, not
so I was very lucky. In fact, my first and my last tour in the Air Force was on one squadron.
Oh, right, that's a good bookend, isn't it? Really,
yeah, it was a bit, yeah.
So you went on to display eventually, didn't you?
I did. That was a good deal later.
Did that just sort of come up, the opportunity, or had you in line for that, or you just
no, not
it?
really. I'd done the one squadron tour. I'd become a fighter recce instructor just before the end of my tour. I'd gone out to Germany to fly on 4 Squadron, which was the recce squadron out there, and the Wildenroth wing. And then when I was eventually posted back to the OCU in 1977, onto the staff, they wanted someone to do the Harrier displays in 1978, and I stuck my hand up, and I did 78, 79 and 81 seasons. Absolutely fantastic.
I did joke with Rick that I probably saw you displaying at some air show.
Yeah, more than likely, yeah. Yeah, some of them were fairly wacky, but my first ever display was at Dover Castle at 8 o'clock in the evening.
It's a bit different.
That was different, yeah.
All right, so you obviously had a good attachment and connection with the Harrier, I suppose, learning all that stuff and working on it.
I mean, I'd been...
Did the aircraft get better as well? Because obviously they introduced later models and stuff. Did it evolve?
It didn't change much, actually. While I was in Germany, the GR1 was updated to the GR3. Basically, they fitted a mark target and laser ranging laser nose to the thing, made it look a bit like a dolphin. Didn't change the handling characteristics very much. Added a little bit of weight, but that was the only major mod.
And were you flying any other aircraft during this time?
No.
Really focused on that.
Really dull and boring.
Was it? It just went. How many years was that? How many years with the Harrier then?
14.
Crikey!
Yeah.
And you obviously went all around Europe and stuff with it.
Yeah, I did. I did obviously, well, basically 4 tours at Wittering. I did 2 one squadron tours, first and last. I did a double tour on the OCU staff. I did a long tour on 4 Squadron in Germany, and then I did Belize. I did a little bit down the Falklands after the war had finished, running the flights down there. So
they got you about then, basically.
Oh yeah. I mean, one squadron's role was interesting. They were part of the Ace Mobile Force, Allied Command Europe Mobile Force, and they had 3 roles. One was the northern flank, which was operating in northern Norway, usually probably from Tromsø was our main operating base, and then supporting the central region in Germany, but also the southern region in Turkey. So we did some interesting deployments. I mean, Tromsø was something else.
I suppose you still couldn't believe you were doing it.
Not really, no.
Dream come true.
I always used to pinch myself.
Isn't that funny? Especially with your
lucky.
first model, and then you've ended up flying Harriers.
Yeah.
So, it just sounds like you're really lucky there, and with your talent, it got you where you wanted. So, quite an easy transition in some ways. Historically,
there's always a bit of luck involved, you know. It's,
being in the right place at the right time.
Right time, that sort of thing. Yeah.
One exciting thing to fly. Right, so moving on from the Harriers, let's have something a bit different. What's the best flight you've had through your career then? Is there one flight you think, this is going right up to today, right the way back? Is there a time when you're flying in certain weather conditions or a certain aircraft and thinking, this is really good, you can think of?
There's one sortie which sticks in my mind, because like I said, I haven't got a very good memory, so I don't even remember what the cockpit sort of aeroplanes are like until I sit in them again.
Oh, okay. It all comes
Apart from
back.
the Harrier, I remember the Harrier. And it's while we were up in Norway, and we'd been tasked, a pair of us, myself and John Lloyd, to go right up round the top, nearly up to Hammerfest, to do a recce or something. And we were in this fjord with all this ice and mountains either side, and we were bounced by two F5s, Norwegian F5s, and we ended up with this 2v2 in this fjord with all this beautiful blue ice as the background. And I thought, my God, am I really here doing this? It was fantastic.
Yeah, it must have been exciting. Nice scenery to match.
Yeah, it was incredible.
So on the back of that, then, what's the most horrible flight you've had, do you think? Not saying necessarily dangerous, but just you think, why am I doing this? Is it back in your SE5?
It is actually, yes.
Freezing your tits off.
Yeah. In the SE, you because you've got no blind flying capability, you can't fly in cloud. Weather becomes very pertinent, and
you get to know it instantly.
Yeah. I've had one or two recoveries or transits in some pretty appalling weather where probably just broken the rules a little bit to achieve it, but it's a bit scary. You can't just pull up when everything disappears in front of you.
No, you just got to go with the flow.
Got to go with it. Yeah.
So, what's your favourite aircraft you've flown then? We had this question time the other day, didn't we? Which one would you? I think I know where it's going to go. When you look back and think, yeah, that was the bee's knees.
I mean, it's got to be the Harrier, but the Hunter and the Gnat are fantastic aeroplanes in their own right. The Hunter's without doubt the prettiest aeroplane I've ever flown.
Definitely, yeah.
But I've also enjoyed, for 24 years, I've enjoyed flying on an SE5.
Yeah, totally different end of the spectrum.
It is, yeah, different challenges. You know, they're all challenging, and the Harrier was certainly challenging at times. But the SE5 has been a completely different challenge.
I suppose you could get two more different aircraft, really, could you? In some ways?
You couldn't really, no. I mean, it's either end of the spectrum, isn't it?
So there must be one you've got and think, this is awful. What about the worst thing you ever sat in and had a go in, or sat alongside and thought, nah, this is not for me?
A friend of mine offered to do my ATPL instrument rating renewal, if you like, and he was going to collect his wife from Coventry in a Seneca from Bristol. So he hired this Seneca, which is a twin prop, low wing, tin thing.
Boxy looking thing, isn't it?
Yeah. And he said, well, you come and fly at Flight Dave, we'll do the little bit down the airway, and then we go and do an ADF approach to Coventry or something like that, pick the wife up and then back to Bristol. So I said, oh, thank you, John, that's just brilliant. We did a little bit down the airway to a reporting point and gave all the blurb and what have you, and then set off for Coventry, did an ADF approach, which I'd never done in my life before, didn't have such a thing on the Harrier, and landed, and we picked up his wife, and he flew it back to Bristol. And at the end of it, he signed me up. Right.
You just didn't enjoy it?
I didn't enjoy it, no. But incredibly generous. He wouldn't take a penny for it. So, I was very grateful to him, because otherwise it would have cost me a few bob.
So another one similar to that. What about, is there an airport that you always like going to, or an airfield, or somewhere you always think this is a nice place, apart from Middlezoy Aerodrome, of course?
Well, of course.
Is there any place you really was a challenging approach or something memorable throughout your career?
Yeah, Tromsø was interesting. The first time we went there, they had they had an RLS, but we didn't have RLS in the Harrier. So the solution was 38 groups sent a Hercules with their mobile TACAN kit, which you could use as an approach aid, and they calibrated it and designed a plate, of how to do it. And it started at about 12,000 feet, so you're quite a way out, And
Just the radio signal, is it? You just follow it in?
yeah, you just fly the needle, but it's got to be pointing in exactly the right direction, if you like, and it brings you down a sort of centre line, and it's hard work. It's really hard work because it's something we didn't normally do. Normally, you were talked down by a radar controller.
It's a bit like a localizer beam.
Yes, just a localizer beam. And so that was what we were doing. Anyway, it was pretty vile weather, and we were in cloud, and I was sweating a bit flying this thing down trying to hold the line as accurately as possible, because there were some very high mountains around.
A bit scary, yeah.
And at about 8,000 feet, I popped out into a clear layer, and I looked out onto to the left, and there was this sheer face of rock not very far away. I thought, thank Christ, I'm on the centre line.
Oh, yeah.
And anyway, back into cloud, and I carried on. And a blizzard had just started at Tromsø. So I came on down, and I was about to throw it away and go around and try and fly a low-level circuit or something, when I came over a sort of red glow of the lights in the snow. So I just slammed it into the braking stop and decelerated, and came down and saw the runway and landed on this snow-covered runway.
Oh.
But
memorable place then, basically.
yeah, it was, but a lovely place to operate from.
Good fun in Norway, then.
Tromsø town was very nice.
I can imagine.
Yeah,
is there alcohol involved there?
Yeah, and there's a university, and
oh,
no,
okay.
it was a great place, and they looked after us very well, because the Brits were still pretty popular with the older generation.
Oh, that's good.
After the war. But the flying up in northern Norway is just breathtaking.
So going back to your flying career then, so what did you do after Harriers then? And how did that change? Did you leave then, or?
Yeah, I did. I'd done a tour and a half flying tours as a squadron leader, and
The squadron leader bit. Now, let's get onto that. Did you naturally fall into that, or did you have ambitions at that point?
No, I was forced into it.
I did wonder about that, because getting to know you through these years, I thought, how did Dave end up being a squadron leader?
Yeah,
'Cause I think naturally you wouldn't have been an ambitious little...
I was beaten into it, if you like.
Oh, okay. I thought, yeah, I'll give it a go.
I was ordered to do the ISS course, individual staff studies or whatever, because you couldn't get promoted above flight lieutenant unless you did that, which was a sort of study at home type thing, like an open university thing. And I hated it with a passion. Anyway, I slogged away and eventually passed, and I finally got promoted, I think, in about 81, something like that.
Oh, right, up to the 80s.
And then, as I say, I did a tour and a half as a squadron leader.
Did you enjoy that? Did you?
Yeah.
Did you have a good, I suppose you had a good bunch of guys with you, and you worked well together then.
I did. I mean, I was sent out to command Belize 1417 flight for about 7 months, and that was just amazing fun. 4 aeroplanes, 40 ground crew, some engineers, and some admin chaps. And it's like your own little air force.
Yeah, it's a good little team, I suppose.
Yeah.
A lot of fun.
It was.
And you get to know everybody as well, I suppose.
And I did the same in the back end of '83 down in the Falklands for a short while with 1453 flights.
So is this coming up to the end of your RAF career then, was it?
Yes, it was.
What were you thinking then? What shall I do next? Or were you pleased to get out, or wanted to get out? Or
I knew I didn't want to stop flying, and there were only 2 options.
Was it forced upon you, or was it kind of...
Yeah, well, I was coming up to 38, which was
Right.
the end of my direct entry type commission. And even though everyone had been granted a permanent commission by then in the Air Force, if I'd stayed on, I was destined for 38 group or MOD or something, which probably would have caused me to jump off a cliff. So I thought, how can I stay flying? And there were two options. One, I stayed in as specialist aircrew, and they give you a reasonable choice of what you want to do. I mean, some people went to CFS and became instructors, or some stayed on the Harrier, or went to another aeroplane, or went to helicopters, or whatever. And I thought, okay, well, that's one option. The other option is to do my ATPL exams and get a job with the airlines, which is what a lot of people did in those days.
Did you not fancy that really? Or?
I didn't really fancy airline flying,
No.
but I thought, well, I'd do it anyway because I was lucky enough to get a grant. They give so many a year in the Air Force for the ATPL exams, and then all you've got to do is pay for your instrument rating. So I basically got myself a frozen ATPL, and I started writing to one or two airlines, and it was a bad time. This was 84 coming up,
Right.
85, and I just wasn't getting anywhere. And then a friend of mine, Dudley Carvel, one of the best pilots, competent pilots I've ever known, he'd had three offers. He'd had Cathay Pacific, Air Europe, I think, and a job on the Fradu at Yeovilton. And he wanted to go to the airlines. So he said, "Hey, Limpig, there's a job at Fradu at Yeovilton might interest you." I said, "Oh, tell me more." He said, "Well, he's flying hunters, behaving like a lunatic." He said, "Why don't you give him a call?" So I rang up the boss down at Fradu, Jock Munsey, and said, "Yeah, look, I'm leaving, and I'd be really interested in doing a job." He said, "Oh, do you know any of the people here?" I said, "Oh, yeah, I know Bertie Penfold, Dave Sumner," and I reeled off a load of names of the people I knew were there. He said, "Oh, you better come down for an interview." So I jumped in my Harrier the next day and went and did a little sortie down to Devon, and then dropped in at Yeovilton, had the interview, stayed overnight, and flew back 2 days later. They said, "Yeah, there's a job here if you want it."
Wow.
So when I left the Air Force officially in August 85, I had 2 weeks leave, and then started flying hunters at.
Isn't that funny?
Oh, it was magic.
What
Yeah.
way to cap? And then obviously,
I couldn't believe it.
as I've spoken about before, this is where Rick and Dave had their fun.
Yes, yeah, we did.
I don't think we need to go into Rick's exciting episode, but
No.
that's really weird. The hunter connection again, isn't it? Were you relieved to get out of the military? Because what Rick was saying.
No, I wasn't. I would have loved to have stayed, but only if I could have flown. And in all fairness, my dear lady wife had put up with the Air Force life, which she didn't really enjoy too much for a long time. And I thought, well, if I went to Yeovilton, we're very near her family at Charmouth, and that would be great for a few years.
But was it weird flying like hunters, but in a very casual way, just turn up, go flying, have fun, go home?
Yeah, it was.
It's almost adjusting back to Civvy Street, I suppose, in some ways.
It wasn't. It was, even though it was a civilian contract, it was run under military rules and so on.
Was that Cobham then, was it?
It was FR Services, which was flight refuelling and Serco at Yeovilton. Yeah, it was great. The flying was exciting. It was sort of 50-foot attacking the ships and all sorts of stuff, and some of it was slightly boring. We used to have to do D school, which was we'd go up and act as target and an interceptor for the fighter controller school at Yeovilton. But it ended up at the end of the course. It usually ended up with a 2v2 or a 2v4 combat. And so we kept our skills honed, and yet there were no secondary duties. As I say, when you weren't flying, you were at home or doing something else.
How many years did you do that?
10.
10?
Yeah.
Wow. It's time went on, I suppose. So how did that finish? The contract finished? Or
the contract came up for renewal again, and FR lost the contract to Huntings, I think, then became Babcock. And the Navy had decided to move Fradu down to Culdrose.
Right.
Which we all thought was a silly move because the weather factor down there was appalling, whereas Yeovilton's was much, much better.
Yeah.
And we were both about the same distance from the operating areas in the Channel. But anyway, the option was there, and there were two things I could have done. The company had said, when you reach 48, there will always be a job for you at Bournemouth on the Falcons, if you would like to. And the other option was to stay on Fradu and go down and fly the Hawk as it was then. At Culdrose. And I thought, I ummed and ahed, chatted it with Sue, and I thought, come on, I want to keep flying fast jets. And we had to make the final decision this particular day. I'm going to go to Culdrose, and I'll just get a light aeroplane and commute at weekends and things. She said, yeah, if that's what you want to do. And so I came into the office and I sat down with Dave Sumner, who was the QFI on Fradu. And he said, what are you going to do then, Limpig? And I said, well, I'm going to go to Culdrose. He said, what do you think? I'm going to go to Bournemouth, good pension and all the rest of it, and the pay is pretty reasonable. And he said, I think you'll regret it if you don't. I thought, God, what do I do? I said, all right, sod it, I'll go to Bournemouth. So I elected to go to Bournemouth.
That was on Falcon 20s, was it?
Falcon 20s, yeah. Yeah, it wasn't a bad move because it was a good company to work for.
And how long did that go on for then, that one?
That went on for 12 years.
Yeah, I didn't realise the timescale was so long on these.
Yeah. Well, I ended up working for FR, as they were then, for 22 years.
Crikey. So quite a career after your RAF war.
It was, but it was still very, very close to the military. It was working either with the Navy or with the Air Force, primarily the Navy for Bournemouth.
So I'll change the subject a little bit. Just one I like to ask is, throughout, who do you think's made a brilliant contribution or really inspired? Who's the best person you've met in aviation or you think has been in it? Is there someone like, have you got a hero in aviation that you look up to, or someone you work with? Or
when I was a youngster, I'd read Reach for the Sky and seen the film.
Yeah.
And I was inspired by Douglas Bader. Not so much that he was a nice personality, because he could be a bit Barbary.
Yeah, we've heard the stories about him.
he just loved flying.
That determination, I suppose.
Yeah, and he was gutsy, without a doubt. So that inspired me, and I can recite the script of Reach for the Sky off pat.
One of your favourite films, then? Obviously.
Yeah, it was.
It is a good film, though.
Yeah, but latter years, I don't know. There have been a lot of guys that have been an inspiration. I can't really select any one, because there are so many guys that I admired and learned a lot from.
I suppose.
I was very lucky to be on one squadron when Pete Squire was the boss. I don't think I've ever met a more competitive man in my life.
Right.
But he was an inspiring personality, and it's absolutely no surprise at all that he became Chief of the Air Staff.
So quite a few then.
Yeah, there's quite a few.
Yeah.
I mean, even Rick.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
I say even Rick, that's not fair. I mean,
yeah.
His career was absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Who you come across in your course of your travels, really.
Yeah.
So going on to the Great War team then. I mean, how did that come about?
Oh well, I'd it's a bit of a long story. I'll try and keep it as short as possible.
That's right.
While I was still working for FR, I lived in a little village called Pitney nearby, and a farmer friend, Bill Higgins, owned a Piper Cub, and he'd put it on a little strip he'd got at the top of the hill just above my house. And he phoned me up one day and said, "Here, Dave, have you got any of that stuff you cover your airplanes with?" And I said, "Well, what do you want that for, Bill?" And he said, "Well, Dave Warren's bloody sheep have been gotten underneath it, and they've ripped the fabric under the fuselage. So I said, I'll come up and have a look, Bill. So I looked at it. It wasn't too bad. I could patch it and dope it and paint it. And he said, that's great. He said, you better go and fly it now. I said, well, I haven't flown a piston tail dragger for 20 years, Bill. He said, it's all right. He said, it's a Piper Cub. It's easy. So I started flying his Cub. And yes, it was easy. It was a lovely aeroplane. And I did that for a few years. And then I said to his son, Tony, I'd really like to buy an aeroplane of my own. Would I be able to put a little hangar up here and keep it up here? He said, yeah, that should be fine. And I nearly bought an Isaac's Fury down at Dunkerswell. But my children and my wife talked me out of it. They said, it's only a single seat, you won't be able to take anyone flying. I thought, all right. So I rang the guy, said, I'm really sorry, I can't go through with the purchase because family disagree. So I gave up on that idea, and I was at an old boys reunion dinner in Wells, and a very old friend of mine from school days, a chap called Peter Goodison, who was colonel in charge of the Welsh TA. He came up to me and told him the story, and he tweaked his moustache after. He said, "You know, David, you're a bloody fool," he said. He said, life's not a rehearsal. Go and buy your sodding aeroplane.
Yeah, right.
So I thought, right, Peter, yes, you're absolutely right. and just about that time, I saw...
The person who inspired you in your career then?
I suppose he did in a way, yeah. Or else I was dead now. But yeah, Peter persuaded me to go and buy an aeroplane. And I saw this advertisement for an SE5a, which was for sale down at Dunkerswell. So I said, I'm going to go and have a look at it. And I took my mother with me. And poor old Mum was pretty much blind. And we stopped not far from the aeroplane. I said, there it is, Mum, what do you think? Said, it's lovely, dear, you better buy it. So I got the chaps to take it up, and I saw it fly, and I had a good look around it, and I had a word with Dave Salisbury, who looked after it as an inspector. And he said, yeah, it's a good aeroplane. And so I bought it then in 1999.
Is this a plane of your... Did you build a model of this when you were like 14?
Yes.
So you knew it really well?
I did.
On your bucket list?
I'd drawn up my own plans for it and built radio control models.
So you knew it very well then?
And it was one of my favourite World War I aeroplanes, probably the favourite.
Yeah.
So I thought, this is great, I've got to have this. And so I bought it. And first time I'd ever flown an open cockpit biplane, flew it back to Pitney, landed uphill on the strip, and stuck it in a hangar I'd had built. And,
what year was this roughly?
That was 99.
99, okay.
So I flew it for a while, and then when I retired in 07 from FR, I thought I'd really love to fly with a Great War display team, because I'd seen them around and I knew a couple of the guys. And I got in touch, and they said, yeah, all right, well, come on down, we'll have our practice at Middle Wallop pre-season in 2008. And I went down there and chatted to them and flew a bit, and the chap running it at the time, Rob Metcalf, he signed off my display authorisation, as he could in those days. He was a display authorisation examiner, and I started flying with the team. And then in 2009, because I had the best radio of the lot, I ended up leading, and I carried on leading the team until I retired this year.
Oh, right, yeah, okay. Oh, that's good. Yeah, again, the time scale, I thought you'd done it longer than that. You know, when you say about 14 years, 12, I thought you'd been doing that for like 25 years or something.
No, only 15 years.
But good fun, though, apart from the cold transits across the country and horrible weather. And
yeah, the transits were a pain, but the actual display flying was great. I mean, leading 9 World War I replica aeroplanes on a display is quite exhilarating.
I obviously seen them before I met you, and when they visited here, it was just wonderful to see. It's just like brilliant, isn't it? It's like, wow. It's a pretty cool way to sort of finish your kind of career in that aspect, isn't it?
Well, it was sort of full circle, wasn't it? You know, I'd started on a little puddle jumper and I ended up on one.
Well, I will put a link up to the team on in the section of this podcast, and then obviously when Pitney was shut down, you ended up at Middlezoy, and I think I should get you, Paul and Simon, to talk about and maybe Julian separately or together. Just how this place evolved, I suppose. I think that's a good thing. That's another story, really, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I mean, Simon was keeping his aeroplane at Pitney at that time, the Pete and Pol, which belonged to Paul and Simon. And we got the word from Tony Higgins that he was going to close the airstrip, and we had to be off the airstrip by
it's short notice, isn't it?
Yeah, the end of 2017, December, which was a bit worrying. No one knew where to go. And coincidentally, about that time, Paul had been contacted by Julian, the farmer here, saying, "Do you think we could ever fly aeroplanes down here again on a regular basis?" Because we had brought the Pete and Pol and the Cub down for his war ag
that's right.
thing the year previous. And Paul rang me up and said, "Dave, get down here quick." Which I did.
Paul would do.
Yeah, and we met Julian and his father, and we talked about what would be possible. And Julian said, "Well, yeah, let's go ahead." And so we then purchased a second-hand steel frame building for the hangar and put that up in 2018, and put the Nissan up the following year, and it's all history.
Here we are today, but I think we'll do a separate one on the airfield, really. And obviously that's when I met you, when I come down here and I worked with Simon, and I had all this story when he worked with me, got an airfield, because we always sort of, which we'll go into when I chat to him, we had this fantasy thing, what would you like, Keith? I'd like to be involved with an airfield. And it's just weird how it all come about, and now all these worlds collided, and where we are now, really.
Yeah.
Sort of ended up doing this today because of that. But
I mean, funnily enough, when I was about to leave the Air Force, I thought, what I'd really love to do is run my own little light airfield.
Yeah.
And of course that never materialised. I did look after the strip at Pitney for a while, but it wasn't the same as here. This is just lovely, and it's
good.
It's doing what we all think is important.
That's
is
right.
Keeping the heritage alive.
That's the most thing we should all be proud of, I think, really, just to keep the heritage alive, and it's a good place to hang out, isn't it? So.
It is. It's a delight, isn't it? We're incredibly lucky.
I think we've nearly concluded, but I like my fantasy questions. I call these 2 fantasy questions.
All right.
If money was no object, and I'm going to transfer all this money over to your account on my phone,
Thank you very much.
do, and you probably couldn't take it anyway. What aircraft would you build or restore or like to own?
It's a choice of 2, I think. A Hurricane or a Mosquito.
Brilliant. That's straightforward enough. I can understand the reason. Don't even have to ask you why. So the other fantasy question I got: if I built you a runway on a nice island and you had 3 aircraft on your desert island disc, but 3 aircraft, would it be the Mosquito and Hurricane and something else?
No, it would be a Harrier, a Mosquito, and a full-size SE5.
There you go. That's it. You can't beat that. Oh, there is one
and Raquel Welsh.
There is another thing I did ask Chris, which was quite funny. I only thought about it because this is an audio podcast. Is there a provocative sound in aviation or smell that you would never forget or always remember? Like when I'm at work, I smell jet fuel, and it just reminds me of golden days back at Heathrow, smelling all the fuel, or an engine sound, or a start-up, or a hydraulic pump that you think's really distinct.
Yeah, it's got to be the sound of a Pegasus and a Harrier being started.
Distinct, aren't they?
When we used to fly out in Germany and out of the woods and what have you, you'd if you weren't on early, you might get a bit of a lie-in, and you would always be woken up by the whine of a Harrier starting to.
Yeah, you never forget that sound.
You don't forget it. No,
it's brilliant. Well, I think that's it for now. Dave will do a 6 images podcast. Give him a chance to dig 6 images out, and then loosely we discussed about doing one about the Hunter, probably with Rick, because that's their favourite.
Yeah,
and I think that's worth recording. And also the plan is probably a Middlezoy one with the directors, just to go into more detail and the fun of building everything, because it was quite an episode watching it all being created. And some funny stories, and Paul go into great detail where he got bits and bobs, so I think that'd be
Yeah.
interesting.
It's left me knackered. It's
Yeah,
hard
I know.
work.
I don't know you did it. I mean, I had a full-time job. I'd come down here and I think, God, a freezing cold day, putting up a hangar. Oh, God, you know. Yeah, mental. Anyway, thanks, Dave. That was really good. And we'll speak to you again soon.
Look forward to that, Keith. Thanks
Cheers
very
then.
much.
Thanks. Bye.